Nick, you're muted. That schoolboy error once again.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening and a warm welcome to the Red and Blue Review. My name is Nick Philpott. I'm joined by Ian Noble. Evening, Ian. How you doing, mate?
Evening, Nick. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. That was a terrible start to the show, wasn't it? You were on mute right at the beginning, and you had a whole hour to rehearse this.
Let me give you the telephone number if somebody gives a shit, because I don't. So we've got no Premier League this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, but what we do have is a special interview with two very... let's say seasoned podcasters, shall we? Bring them up, Nigel, because I'd love to introduce them. Okay, we are very delighted to be welcoming Kieran Maguire Kevin Day from the five-year plan and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Good evening, guys. How are you?
All right, mainly Price of Football is the podcast we do together.
Yeah, you do together.
Kieran's never been invited onto 5-year plan for obvious reasons that we'll discuss.
Tell what you don't do.
I have been on once.
When were you on 5-year plan?
When you invited me to go through the accounts and one of your blokes fell asleep.
Oh, yes, indeed. Oh, yeah, James. By the way,
we haven't got any accounts, so don't worry about that. So there we go.
That's the best theme tune to any podcast I've ever heard. That's fantastic.
Well, it was actually placed on purpose for obvious reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, in YouTube and Facebook land, in case you don't know, Kevin Day is a loyal Crystal Palace fan, and Kieran Maguire is not. Let's just say he supports our friends down on the south coast, but which actually, if you don't mind, leads me into my first question, boys. Ian's going to be covering off Price of Football podcast in a minute, but I've got a question for you. How did this relationship start with you two? Which is what I think a lot of our listeners would like to know. I mean, first of all, producer guy must have got hold of one of you, and then the other one. And did you know each other beforehand? And did you know that you both supported the other team? Kev?
Kieran and producer guy decided it was best not to tell me who Kieran supported for the first... We'd done 4 episodes of the pod, because if I'd been told beforehand that Kieran was a Brighton fan, I wouldn't have done it, because Kieran is a much more mature person than I am. Kieran believes football is bigger than rivalries. I don't. I'm sure we'll come on to this at a later stage. But I am childish enough. I would have said, I'm sure. But to be perfectly honest, as Kieran will say, when producer guy got in touch with it and said, we'd like you to do this podcast about football finance, I just got back to him and said, wow, you've got the wrong bloke. But give my regards to everybody who does do it, and come back to me in 4 weeks when you've had a better idea, to be honest. But Kieran and Guy were more the driving force behind. They wanted Justin Morehouse, but it turned out he wasn't available. I didn't find that out till about 6 months in. But that would have been a Man United fan doing it with Kieran would have been much more acceptable. But Kieran will tell you the nuts and bolts of how our relationship started. I'll just tell you that it was for the first between 6 and 10 weeks. It was rocky. Let's put it that way.
Producer Guy. I used to do a lot of work on 5 Live money shows on football finance nonsense. Producer Guy decided he'd had enough of 5 Live, because he used to do the pre-breakfast show. So that was a 5 a.m. show. So I got to know him on that. Then he contacted me out of the blue and says, I'm quitting 5 Live. I want to set up a podcast production company. I want to have a chat with you. So he came to me and he pitched this idea for this football finance podcast. And he was going to charge me quite a lot of money a month, and I was going to provide all of the content.
Sounds like a deal.
Sounds like a deal. And I'm going, I just don't. It won't work with just me. Yeah, I'm a teacher, but I'd seen things like the Infinite Monkey Cage with I've forgotten the names. The guy that used to be in that band. And Robin Ince, Professor Brian Cox. And I said, well, I think you need 2 people. I think you need a presenter. And I know Kevin's very, very modest about this. I always remember Kevin, because I liked his style on Match of the Day and Channel 4 Racing and so on. But all Brighton fans remember Kevin from when Brighton were fucked, I think was the technical phrase in the late 90s. Kevin did a benefit gig to help raise money to save the club.
You did what?
And I thought, this is the person whose values I really like.
My logic at the time was, if you hate a club with a passion and a vengeance, the last thing you want is for them not to exist. So because it leaves a big hole in your heart. And also, there is something, Kieran believes it's more than I do, but football eventually is more than about rivalry. I would like to point out, and I always point this out when Kieran tells me, I still haven't been paid my expenses for that gig. Obviously, seriously, it was a benefit, so I wouldn't take any money. But they said, we'll pay you train fare, we'll get you a cab. None of that happened. So somehow, Brighton, the media darling club, I'm going to leak it to the media one day that Brighton, Tony Bloom, the richest man in football, still technically owes me £18.50. I think I could bring that club down with that information. There are quite a few people in showbiz and sport that I could bring down if I decided to write my memoirs. But I think I could bring Tony Bloom down, although it was a long time before Tony Bloom was involved, unfortunately. But yeah, it was one of those nights where I did just before the game we won 3-2. We were 3-0 up at half time. And then Brighton scored twice, so it was 3-2 at half time. Yeah. The week before that, for some reason, CBS decided to do a feature on this Palace Brighton rivalry. And they sent this American sports guy over. And it was me and Stephen Grant, who's a Brighton fan. So we filmed in Croydon and then we went down to Brighton. And Stephen was a bit late, and I was explaining to this English film crew what, I hate to use the word nonce, but I was explaining how the reasons why we didn't like Brighton fans. I said Brighton fans are all bourgeois and middle class. They've all got Labradors. They've all got Volvos. They're all vegetarian. They all think they're Doctor Who. And then lo and behold, Stephen Grant, which was perfect. It's like, thank you, comedy god. Stephen Grant came along riding a scooter with a Tom Baker patchwork trench coat on and a Brighton scarf that he put wires in to make it look like his scarf was blowing in the wind.
Like scarf is there, yeah.
And so I said, well, fuck me, Quidditch postponed today, is it? So he just played into the hands of every stereotype about it. And of course, when I did this Brighton gig, in the summer, I did this thing for the London-based branch of the Brighton Supporters Club. And again, it's the same as the gig and it's the same as Stephen Grant. They all think they're hilarious. I'm a professional comedian, so I always win. But it's kind of like you sort of have to. It's really Julian Chenry, massive Palace fan, who does our live stuff. Yeah. He's even older than Kieran and I. He hates Millwall and Charlton. He's got nothing against Brighton. Right? He's got this thing. Brighton are a well-run club. We should be looking to. I don't get that. Right. So it's nice to come home and discover that my 29-year-old son really hates Brighton. Just by osmosis, he just properly really, because I think you have to have, right, as long as it stays, as long as the hatred is like pantomime villain hatred. Yeah. Football has to have it. You have to have. That's the bizarre right. And the reason is, Brighton and Palace fans both love the rivalry because no one else understands it. No one else gets it. So we both get quite protective of it because it makes no sense. It makes perfect sense to Palace fans. Why they hate us, I don't know, but it makes perfect sense for us to hate them. But it's just like it's just the fact you do sometimes, because Kieran is too mature for his own good sometimes. Yeah, that he puts football itself above rivalries, but you have to have these. Like it's like I genuinely think if Palace were in the FA Cup final, Kieran would want us to win. Whereas if that was the other way around, I would emigrate if Brighton won the FA Cup. I wouldn't be able to do the pod for 4 weeks because I can't do that thing of, oh, well done, congratulations, you deserve it. Because every part of my body would be furious. Although if we won the FA Cup, I would expect Kieran to go to do exactly what he would do.
But Kev, I've got to say to you, as a parent, and I'm a parent of 3 boys, okay, 2 of which are massive Palace fans, okay, and they have the same hatred of the blue and white lot on the south coast. I won't even use the name, okay, down there, okay, as I do, and I feel as a parent, it makes me immensely proud that my work on this planet is done. Do you not feel the same way?
I do, as long as it's really strange. It's like in my first book, whenever I refer to Brighton, I always put a small b. I refuse to put a capital B. And the Bloomsbury, the publishers, go, well, this is childish. I go, I know, but that's part of being a football fan. And it's like...
Do you have an asterisk for the O as well? So, you know... So
that would have been a great idea.
Yeah.
That would have been a great idea.
Kieran, I've got to ask you, okay, so if Palace were ever in the cup final, okay, as he's just described, okay, if Palace ever gets to the cup final, would you be cheering on for Palace?
It would depend who the opponents. I'll be really pleased for Kevin. Because to get to if Palace were playing Manchester United or Chelsea, something like that. I mean, I loathe Chelsea. I would want you to win.
But that's Kieran, that's a relatively new thing, isn't it? The Chelsea.
Yeah.
Is it?
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's just because of Graham Potter and Cucurella and Caicedo.
I don't have an issue with Graham Potter because I'd have done the same thing. Somebody offered me £12 million a year. I'd turn up as the Palace mascot for that.
Your second team.
My second team would Kilmarnock.
Right, listen,
really.
I'm delighted. We're doing. I hope you realise that we're actually doing something that I don't know if any other football pod has ever done before, celebrating the success of another podcast. Okay, which is what we're doing tonight. 5-year plan. Okay, brilliant show. Love every minute of it. Okay, and the price of football. Massive congratulations to you. Which we're proud that you're on with us tonight, boys. But, and here's the but. We didn't really ask for you two. We wanted Smudge and Finley. Where are they?
I could probably drag him down, actually.
Do you know the irony of the name Finley, Kieran?
No.
Okay, I'm going to cast your mind back to a Palace-Brighton game, a few years ago now, where a certain striker scored a hat-trick against Brighton. Okay, I had 66-1 on Andy Johnson to score a hat-trick that day, and he did. Okay, and his eldest son's name is
Finley.
Wow.
Correct. Were you there that day, Kieran? Did you go to that game on the 26th of October 2000?
Yeah. I was there. I mean, was that
2002?
2002. Yeah. I left at half time and I went to Soho to restock my porn supply.
Well, my accountant, he lives in Hastings. He's a Brighton fan and a proper Brighton fan like you are, Kieran. And he said to me he couldn't go home. They wanted to leave early and they would not let him out. So, you know, that still is probably one of the greatest days.
Was that the game with the wall? Was that the game with the wall?
Oh, I don't know.
No, we hadn't played them for 10 years, 8 years.
Oh, it was longer than that, I think. Yeah.
I think there is a generation of Palace fans who we just didn't play them. So there were a lot of Palace fans who grew up knowing that we were supposed to hate Brighton, but they never saw.
They didn't know why, did they?
They didn't know why. And then Steve Coppell managed them for a time, so that took the edge off for a certain amount of people. But you had 60. A mate of mine had. Remember when Danny Butt scored the hat trick against Wolves in the FA Cup? A mate of mine had. He claims he had money on the perfect hat trick, but that's bollocks. No, he did have money on the. He did have money on that. It's only 66-1 for AJ to score a hat trick.
It was.
Wow.
But I still celebrate it like you don't believe for
the thing is, we still sing about it. I'm not sure I agree with that. You know, they even started singing it at the Bridge last Sunday about Andy Johnson scoring, you know, with his right foot and left foot, and when he plays the Brighton. And I'm not so sure I like that now. You know, we should be singing about the current players.
I agree, but if you can just see, it's slightly confusing because your camera's reversed of everything. So, but over one of my shoulders, you can just see a picture that's there purely to annoy Kieran every time we pod. And it's a picture of Benteke and Mateta celebrating their goals against Brighton in the lockdown game when we had 2 touches in the Brighton half and scored 2 goals.
Well, wasn't it amazing?
And Potter shucking his water bottle.
And that was a time when we thought Mateta, because it was a back heel nutmeg, wasn't it, with the keeper?
Yeah.
And we all thought, well, that's the best Mateta will ever do. So retire him now, retire his shirt number. He won't play for Palace again. It was a terrible mistake. And then now, look, lo and behold, to the extent, I don't know who's going to start against Leicester. We'll come on to this transfer window, I'm sure, but the Mateta Nketiah thing is
interesting dynamic, which we will come on to.
Yeah.
But before we do, Kevin, I'm absolutely handing the floor over to you now. I want you to take as much time as you want over this next subject, okay? And talk to me and everybody else about March of the Day, please.
Yes. So nice, thank you. We're going to put that poster up in the Parsons Arms for the Leicester game. So on the 17th, 18th and 19th of September, which I've just realised is bloody next week, I'm walking from Spurs to Selhurst via every ground in London, which is 63 miles, to raise money for the Lilly Foundation, who are leading the fight against mitochondrial disease and who are all Palace fans. I got involved in Lilly Foundation through Jonathan Pierce, whose sister-in-law, Liz, lost her daughter, Lily, to mitochondrial disease and decided... she hates the word inspirational. She's a little... she also hates me calling her a little South Croydon housewife, but essentially what she decided that Lily's death wasn't going to be in vain, and she set up this charity, which has done remarkable work. I mean, they're now funding a ward at Great Ormond Street. They're funding a ward in Newcastle General Hospital. They've had the law changed on stem cell research, all sorts of stuff. But in May last year, I went to the funeral of my dear mate, Andy Smart, which was, as comedians' funerals often are, a riotous event. But I didn't realise, or Kevin 30, if you're in a really good mood, I didn't realise how much Andy had done for charity, because he kept it under his hat. So I didn't know that he volunteered for 5 days every Christmas at a charity for the homeless. And I came away from the funeral thinking, I've got to do a little bit more here. It's all very well organising a benefit for Lily once a year, but I've got to do something more tangible. So I approached again, they don't like me saying this, but they're all women of a certain age. Let's put it this way. They're all what my dad would call salts. They're all South London salts. They're lovely. So I approached them and said, look, I need to do a bit more here. So they couldn't believe their luck. So initially they had me climbing Kilimanjaro, and then they had me climbing Mount Snowdon, Ben Nevis, and I went, look, no climbing. How about swimming the channel? I can't swim. So eventually we compromised on this. We thought it had to be football. It's one of those things where you sit down with somebody in November and they say, right, we've arranged it, and you think, well, that'll never happen, and then suddenly it's next bloody week. But I don't. Do you know what?
Kevin, can I interrupt you, Kev? How did you come up with the idea of walking all the London football grounds? It's quite an interesting one. How did that come up?
Well, I thought it would have to do, because I do the marathon march every year for the Palace Foundation.
Yeah.
So I knew I could walk. I'm not athletic. I can't run to save my life. I always say it's something to do with my bones are too strong, so they jars my feet. Yeah, but
that was my mate.
I thought it would make sense if what I did was football related somehow. So it just seemed like a doable thing. It just, because you want something that's quite difficult, but not something that's going to kill me. Yeah. So it just seems. So next year, if this goes all right, next year I probably will do the walk to Brighton and back and do a little bit. But and brilliantly, so that they love the idea. The only thing that really annoys me is that all the club, we got involved with all the clubs. So I've got comedian mates joining me at various. So Alan Davis and Dara are joining me at Arsenal. Sean Wall should be joining me at QPR. Kieran is going to be joining me at Millwall. There's all sorts of people walking with me. And all the clubs have been remarkably cooperative, except one. And I'll give you, it's the club
please we say Palace.
Please it's just, they just keep forgetting to. So Chelsea, for example, were brilliant. Chelsea went, if he wants a dressing room tour when he turns up, he can meet a player, because they got 48 players who've got fuck all else to do other than me. But Palace, I keep having to remind Palace, say, can you return the email? And they're going, yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be great. Which is, that's been our attitude to everything in the past 10 seasons, basically. Yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be great. But so it's been really heartening that all the clubs have been very friendly, and so many people want to. That was the thing that worried me, my wife, the most, was the fact, because I'm direction dyslexic, I can't read maps. So she was worried that I'd end up getting lost, the darkness.
And the wrong turning, ended up in Southend or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. I was supposed to be at Charlton and I'm at Southend. So it's like, and then, I don't mind the walking. The walking bit is fine. The bit I hate is asking for money. I can't stand it. And it's like having to, because the charity go, look, loads of comedians. And it's like, I don't want, it's just that bit of you come up with a group text thing and you think, I have to try and be funny and then slip the information in that I want money out of them or I want them to help. And it's just, I
wouldn't worry about that, mate. I wouldn't worry about it. Listen, there'll be people watching this show. There'll be lots of other people that watch later on YouTube, and people want to give to you. So don't worry about that bit.
I'm sure I won't. Yeah, but so Brighty's going to walk the last mile or so with me when I get back to Selhurst Park. So, which is nice. I mean, it won't be laugh a minute. Let's be fair, but it will be company. And it's probably if it was
he's hard work, isn't he? He's so hard work.
I got, well, how can you not? He once really got the hump with me. a Player of the Year do at Fairfield Halls, which I was comparing.
Mm.
And Righty turned up 10 minutes late, obviously. He was long retired from football, but he'd been invited. So Righty turned up 10 minutes late and sat down in front, and obviously everyone's cheering and some of them are booing. So Righty once said to me, "What will it take you to stop calling me Judas?" I went, "The time machine. So you can travel back and not kiss your fucking badge when you scored against us in the League Cup."
Yeah.
But so Righty comes down the front, and I went, "Hey, Ian Wright's here." Look. So that means Brighty will be here somewhere, probably about 15 yards behind him, struggling to keep up, I imagine.
As usual.
Which got a big round of, and then at half time, Brighty had me up against the wall going, "I had a really bad injury." And I was like, "Yes." And to be fair, I think if Brighty had any pace, I think he was as good as Teddy Sheringham. He just couldn't. I think he would have played for England. I think Brighty, and Ian Wright says this. Ian Wright says that he would never have been Ian Wright without Mark Bright. But the thing is, Mark does take himself quite seriously, which is great. He's right to. So, and also, I know it's like he's so much more. That's very funny. The Gahey ward in Newcastle. That's very funny. I know what Mike Bright is like. He's much more fit than me. He'll end up finishing way before I do, and everyone who's there to meet me will have fucked off by the time I get there, because Bright he'll have broken the ribbon and taken all the applause, and everyone would have gone. But it's nice. It's nice to have people walking through.
It's nice to see Bromley on that list. I'm a Bromley boy. Grew up in Bromley. Fantastic to see him in the Football League.
You say that, but it's fucking added 10 miles on my. If it was still Sutton to Palace, that'd have been great. But
you should have got Andy Woodman to do that last leg with you, because he could do as it looks like he could do with a walk.
You'd have to roll him. My God, I struggle to realise it as the same. But to be, I mean, what a job he's done at Bromley.
Oh,
and it's you can't help. We've had this discussion on the pod before, Price of Football, about how it's not a threat. It's brilliant for South London. I'm really. It's such a shame that Bromley and Sutton weren't still together, because as a proud South London boy, I think it's great having Bromley in the league, and I think it can only help. And I think Palace should be doing more to create. And we have created links with both clubs, but I think and to be fair to Steve Parish, the way we release young players now has improved so much in 10 years. Steve Parish is really. Is really helping in terms of benevolence and welfare when we release young players. We're not just kicking them back to the streets where they came from now. So, we let clubs like Sutton and Bromley know that these players are becoming available. And I think we need to do more. We need to create bigger links with the local clubs. There's no doubt we'll always be the top club in the area. It's as simple as that. In a way that Charlton were in the 40s and Millwall never particularly were. But I think it's only good for them. In the same way with Kieran's got links with clubs like Lewis and Whitehawk down on the south coast. It can only I don't know why Kieran's laughing, but it can only help. And also the more Steve Parish creates links with smaller teams, the more it might encourage him to have a more modern attitude towards distributing the money in the Premier League. Because Steve Parish, Kieran and I have spoken a lot to Trevor Birch and people at the English Football League recently, and I won't quote what they say, but Steve Parish is one of the leaders of the group in the Premier League who don't see why they should be distributing Premier League money to smaller clubs, right? Which is an attitude I 100% completely disagree with.
Me too.
But you would hope that the more links we have with clubs like that, the more Premier League clubs realise how important it is to make sure that money is distributed fairly through, especially as, let's be fair, it's only 15 years ago that we weren't that far away from, we were only one relegation and Bromley were only one promotion away from us playing in the same league.
Absolutely.
I will never use the word established Premier League club about us, but there may be times in the future when we need money to be distributed properly. And again, this is something you need to talk to Kieran about, but I think that the more links we develop with local clubs at whatever level, the better it is.
It's interesting you say that. Can I just ask Kieran a question on that? Because it's something that I'm glad you raised that, Kev, because it's years ago. I don't know if you all remember that Portsmouth went into administration, and it was I think we were at this point where we were about to be promoted, or we were promoted, but they were struggling, and I think they were fan-led, trying to get a fan-led group together. And I thought to myself then, wouldn't it be a brilliant PR exercise for with all this money sloshing around, especially in the Premier League, that Palace just wrote him a cheque for £1 million, no holds barred. And is there any precedent to that, Kieran?
There have been one or two transfers historically when clubs have been really struggling, where the buying club has said, we will give you all of the money straight away. Now, they've tended to get a discount on the back of that. And perhaps the selling club has had to forego a sell-on clause. But yeah, there are things. Yeah, and some of the bigger clubs, I think this is sort of going back a fair while, their pre-season tours, they would help out some of the smaller clubs. I can remember Manchester United and Manchester City going to places like Rochdale. And certainly Manchester United used to go to Peterborough on a regular basis. So I think that was more to do with Alex Ferguson setting out his son, Darren Ferguson, who's a very misunderstood individual who accidentally kicked his wife in the stomach when she was pregnant, because these things happen.
Matter of record. Well, Kieran, if you go back to our very first weeks on the pod, when one of the reasons that, unfortunately, that the price of football became so popular so quickly was because we were the only people really dealing with the Bury situation. Well, we started off with a couple of hundred people listening, and then the Bury thing happened, and Kieran was doing an analytical deep dive on what was happening there. So we were the only people putting this stuff out, and the press picked up on it. And Bill Kenwright, Kieran, if you remember, Everton offered Bury £1 million, right, to sort their issues out, and the EFL put a block in it because they said he would then have undue influence on two clubs, which you can't have. And Kenwright said, no, I just want to give them the money, and then once they're clear of debt, they can resolve. I've always argued that there should be some kind of benevolent fund, welfare fund in the football, that you take 1% of every club's annual turnover or whatever, you put it in a pot, and if there is a club in danger, you don't just throw it at them, and it's properly administered, but you just give a club like Bury or Portsmouth, you just give them enough time. Maybe you give them 3 months' money to pay the wages, to pay contractors, because remember, when a club goes out of business, like when we went bust,
it's a local area,
it was St John's Ambulance, local printers, all this is a point Kieran always makes, just to give them 3 months. And if at the end of that period it hasn't worked, and then because I think it's a Kieran, you remember during COVID, we it's a miracle that more clubs haven't gone under, but it's only by the grace of God, to be perfectly honest. And when the Premier League in particular has got that much money, and the trouble is the EFL they've got nothing to negotiate with, have they? The EFL want more money, but there's nothing really, Kieran, that they can offer.
No leverage
in return, is it? There's no leverage for them. But
Kieran,
yeah, I mean, you're talking there about local economies, aren't you? Suffering, if a football club goes bust, it means so much to so many people, doesn't it? Supporting a football club. We've talked about it already on the show earlier on. It's tribal. People, it affects moods over whole weekends, over whole, the future week. What's your Monday morning like? Well, it's crap if my team's lost. It's pretty good if we've won, thanks very much. And it's okay if we've only drawn. But look, we've got to find a way of doing this if possible. And if you've got Brighty's ear on the last mile of this long walk you're doing, Kev, then you can say, have a word with your mate Steve Paris and see what he can do, because that is the only way something like this can happen, if we can influence these people that have got the power to make it change, surely.
Well, Ian, I admire your optimism, thinking that I might have the ear of, I might have Mike Bright's ear for a mile, but I can understand Steve Parish's point of view as well, to an extent. But as Kieran is about to tell us something important, as you say, the EFL got no leverage, and it's Steve Parish, it's no sweat off any Premier League club owners knows if Macclesfield Town or Swindon or Forest Green go bust, what's the problem? Sorry, Kieran, you were about to say.
All I was going to say, that the only leverage that the EFL have got is a two-legged semi-final in the Carabao Cup. And that's it. And there's all this talk about fixture congestion. The EFL are willing to give it up, but they're not going to give it up for nothing, and rightly so. And also, sort of going back to what we were just talking about earlier, in terms of support, you've got to look at the owners, because when Derby County had problems, the EFL offered to lend the club money to help them through. and the Derby County owner didn't like the conditions. The EFL said it comes with strings attached. As Kevin said, you can't just give handouts, because that actually encourages bad behaviour.
Yeah, sure.
And Mel Morris said, no, I'll run it as I choose. And he had his kids mithering him. I mean, for all his faults, he put in £200 million into that club, and he got his kids in the ear saying, "Dad, this is our inheritance. You don't even like football." So the club goes into administration. Again, as Kevin was saying, it's local supplies. And if you are a local supplier, the chances are you're a Derby County fan. And if everybody else you're chasing for 30 days credit, which Derby County, I'm a supporter, I'll give them 60 days, I give them 90 days. So all of the local creditors got absolutely stiffed. My understanding is that the new owner that's come in has actually looked after those suppliers because he's a genuine fan. So, there are good people still in the game.
Yeah. But, and also bear in mind that if a club goes into administration, or God forbid worse, the staff that get made redundant, 90% of them will be fans of that club. And it's like everybody watching us now are probably of a certain generation. We've been through 2 administrations. That the second one in 2010, people don't remember. We were 5 minutes away from being expunged. We were 5 minutes away from not existing. I'm happy to admit that when the news came through, I went into the toilet and cried for 10 minutes. I was happy to admit that. And so Palace fans know, Brighton fans know, Brighton fans have been through it as well. So we understand that it's not just, it's, as Ian said, it's not just the financial implications. It's the thought of not having to, and we talked about Phoenix clubs and we joked about Phoenix clubs, but the thought of not having a Palace to go to, the thought of not having Parsons Arms to go to, it doesn't bear thinking about. And that's why I think there's a slight disconnect between older fans and younger fans, Palace-wise. It's a debate because so many younger Palace fans want us to. You hear this all the time. We've got to push on. Which I agree with. And I'm getting fed up. We start every season as though we've just been promoted. But from my point of view, having lived through twice when we nearly didn't have a club, these are the golden days. Right? Being a Premier League club, as far as I'm concerned, is a wonderful thing. But I also fully understand why younger fans think, well, I'm bored of finishing 12th now. I want to get into at least have a little European journey, like Kieran barely mentioned on the what a fucking nightmare that was.
Don't remind him.
Right. Tim, by the way, I see Tim Richards. People can ask as many questions as they want about anything on.
Absolutely.
We've got loads. We've got loads of questions to cover this evening, so we probably ought to move on from this because we could just talk for the next half an hour on this.
Before we do, one last question to Kev. Kev, have you set yourself a target for the Lily Foundation money-wise?
I haven't. They have. I try not to look at it. We're doing all right. We'll never quite get as much money as I want to get. It's, times are tough all round. Still, there's it's amazing. There's another conversation Kieran and I have had on the pod quite a lot. It's amazing how people outside London think that everyone in London is living the high life. It's just not the case. So to be fair, we've already raised enough money to make it worth me doing it. If we'd been stuck at 500 quid, I would have accidentally pulled an ankle and said I'm not doing it. So I'm definitely doing it. But we'll never. But there'll never be enough money to raise. But I'm grateful to everyone who's donated somewhere. And the one thing as well I should point out to people is the same with the marathon march as well for Palace. It's like the money. This is not money that's going to admin costs. This is money that's going on specific projects as well. So the only thing is that hopefully the marathon march will be a piece of piss after doing 63 miles, just doing it 126 miles in a day. But again, I can't wait for them. The marathon march for me is one of the best social events. I urge anybody, you've still got time to do it. And you don't have to do the whole thing. You can sign up to do half of it. You can sign up to do if you're mobility impaired, you can sign up to do the last 100 yards if you want. But even if you don't do it, just turn up at the end. It's a international break, so it's just fantastic to have a weekend when you're not worrying about what Palace are doing. But B, just walking through the streets with 200 Palace fans, and you know that you can mention Dave Swindlehurst and people don't look at you blankly. You can just have a half-hour conversation about Dave Swindlehurst. You can start on about Alan Mullery and Peter Ward without people staring at you.
Very good. Very good. Can I mention then, as you mentioned the marathon march there, I want to mention my friend Yasmin, who I go to most away games, nearly every away game with. She did it for the first time last year. It nearly half killed her. but she's going to do it again this year. She only decided this week. So Yasmin, who was on this pod only a couple of weeks ago, I think after the Brentford game, Yas, get your details in the chat if you're watching about
well done, Yasmin.
Marathon March, and you need sponsorship for that as well. So we need to encourage. I'm not sure I could do it, but maybe I could. I don't know. You've challenged me, Kev. I'm going to have to think about it now.
Well, think about it for next year, because honestly, I'm not going to lie. About mile 17, it gets hard. It does get difficult, but you're with Palace. The adrenaline gets you through the first sort of 6 miles.
Yeah,
but then knowing because we used to finish in central London, that made no sense. So we decided that it's a round route now. So we start at Selhurst and finish at Selhurst. And knowing that, in the next couple of miles, you'll be seeing the floodlights at Selhurst, and you get to walk around, which even now at my age, you get to walk around. I've walked around loads of football pitches, but even now, just walking around the pitch at Selhurst, even though the groundsman's still there to make sure no one puts a toe on his precious fucking pitch. But just walking around at Selhurst, just getting to sit in the changing room and just everybody clapping music. It's a beautiful...
You've sold it to me.
I'm sure it's like when Brighton have their annual quinoa festival. It's that unusual. It's the same sort of thing, Kieran. The same sort of vibe.
Honestly, going back to the pod, I just want to ask a couple of questions on the pod, please, because I am an avid listener every week. In fact, he's probably caused more rows between me and
he's lying.
Yeah, it is. I listen to every. Now, tell me, what sort of numbers are you guys generating? Because we're quite. I'm sure the 5-year plan. I'm more than delighted with a few thousand listeners. We're more than delighted with a few hundred to a couple of thousand listeners. What sort of figures are you guys putting in now?
We've sort of hit a plateau a bit. We it's about 40,000 a week, which is miraculous. We think it's miraculous, but I think we've kind of reached every. On the Venn diagram of accountants and football fans, I think we've hit everyone in the country, basically. So we're at a set stage where we need to try and find ways of attracting new listeners. So we're going to do a couple of films, for example, explaining things like amortization. There are still things, and Kieran will tell you this, there are still concepts I don't quite get my head around. So we're going to do a little archive of films to explain things like amortization and the loan system, for example. And I like the fact that we've got Trevor Chalabar with no option to buy whatsoever, none. Don't even ask. So I know. So we explain things like that, and we're looking at getting. We've got some great guests, but we're looking at getting some more. So we're really happy with the way things are going, and we've got. I mean, Kieran's influence and I think traction is the word they use in the football world is incredible. I just thank my lucky stars every day that Kieran was on our side. If there was World War II, because if Kieran was in the Gestapo in World War II, we would have lost. Right? Because Kieran's network of contacts within the game, and we're taking really serious. Kieran's taken really seriously within the game. That if we ever have to interview someone and it's just me, they panic a little bit because I have to say, Match of the Day 2 was the best thing I've ever done. I loved it, but doing the pod with Kieran, it comes a pretty close second. But the trouble is, so much of the things I've learned from Kieran are things I wish I hadn't because I think I think not just that. I think people in general are more interested in football finance now than they were 10 years ago, and rightly so, because it's more scary now and it affects us more than it ever did. And we all grew up when clubs were owned by Raymond Bloy or Bob Lord or whoever it was, and those days are long gone. So
Kevin, I want to cut across you. I think you touched on it earlier. One of the reasons we're more interested in football finance now is the extremities of it. We talked about the wealth of the Premier League and clubs potentially going under and all the rest of it, and it seems wrong, doesn't it? And the risk of going over old ground again, it seems wrong. So is that not the reason why we're more interested in it, Kieran? What do you think?
I think it is that the number of zeros involved is quite critical. I mean, Brighton was sold in 1995 for £56.25.
Oh, that was cheap at half the price.
You left the door open, Kieran.
I knew what was coming next. And now you've got Chelsea being sold for £2.5 billion. And and looks like there's things happening at Chelsea behind the doors. We unfortunately, I think the thing that frustrates myself and Kevin most of all is that we have built up sort of some decent contacts, even though I think Kevin might be on a witness protection scheme very, very soon, because he's managed to upset the country's leading sports lawyer on our last podcast, and I got a message from him a couple of days ago to say, Kevin said that there's a better sports lawyer in the country than me. Is he serious? And I'm going, I'm sure he meant it for comic effect, and he didn't. He didn't see the funny side at all. So, and Nick DeMarco is a very famous person in sports law, and he's also got Italian heritage. So, if I was Kevin, doesn't want to wake up with a horse's head next to him, I'd be very careful what I said.
Right.
Let's be fair, Kieran. He also collects typewriters. I think I'm all right. I mean, I'll just. There's a couple of blokes in the Portsmouth Arms. I'll just. I didn't. All I suggested was that Manchester City could possibly, because let's face it, the Leicester. I don't want to come back to Kieran on something after this, but about the Championship, the Leicester thing was a complete fuck up. There's no doubt about that. And all I said was, if the Premier League couldn't get that right, then there's no chance that Man City are going to get done on their 115 charges. Simply none. And also, what I implied was that Man City could afford even more expensive lawyers than Nick DeMarco. But also, what I did imply is that if I was a Leicester fan, you'd be absolutely delighted with what happened. But there's no doubt, I've got mates who are Forest fans who are fucking furious, and Everton fans who they've got away with it. It's as simple as that. And I just worry that there's an element of saying, "Oh yeah, clever, well done." I'll be interested to see what the reaction to. We're playing Leicester next game. I'll be interested to see what the reaction to them is. I'll be interested to see whether the HF have got any response to it, because it leaves an uneasy taste in my mouth that they have got away with it. But also, Kieran, what I've learned with Kieran is that sometimes Kieran and I are both hopeless romantics when it comes to football. We are exactly what the UEFA want to call legacy fans, what the Super League want to call legacy. We are hopelessly romantic about football, but we have to acknowledge that sometimes it's the clubs that are at fault as well. It's not always football as a general. It's not always the Premier League, and the Championship, Kieran, is a classic example. It's one of the reasons why I'm perfectly happy with finishing fourth and bottom in the Premier League, because the Championship is a basket case, and it's mainly down to the clubs in it, Kieran. I mean, the figure you keep telling us about the ratio of income to wages, which is meant to be whatever it is, £80 to 100, and what is it? What clubs like Stoke, for example?
Well, when Reading 2 years ago, they spent £243 on wages for every £100 which came through the door, and you go, that's not a way to run a business, is it? Yeah. And then the owner gets bored. And whilst the owners are putting in the money, whilst they're treating it as a trophy asset, and effectively it's like owning a few racehorses, or you have your new trophy wife and you're prepared to spend money on them. When they get bored with whatever it is, that's when the problems lie. We saw it with Derby. We've seen it with Wigan. The Wigan issue was Wigan was part of a gambling debt from one person to another. Now, we can't go public with that particularly, and because it was losing so much money.
But Kieran, don't you get worried?
We're live. Hang on a second, Kieran. You know a bit about not going public. This is live. You know that.
I know.
Kieran, don't you worry that Tony Bloom's going to get bored and not want to play anymore?
Good question.
Is that not the same scenario? Because he's the guy that's put all the money into Brighton, isn't he?
If I see Tony Bloom crossing the road, I jump in front of the traffic. Because without him, Brighton go back to being a League One club. There's no doubt he's put a ridiculous amount of money into the club. It is ridiculously clever, but it's a huge risk. And when I wrote a piece, and when I said that, the club, and I'm not very popular at Brighton, I can assure you. When I said that, they go, you can't go around saying things like, what's it? But I think I do risk assessments. That's my job. I do analysis. And you look, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threat. Well, the biggest threat at Brighton Hove Albion is that something happens to Tony Bloom. Now, he's a fan. Look, if you see him at match celebrate, he's a genuine fan of the club who happens to be a billionaire. it's a bit like Steve Parish. Steve Parish is Palace through and through. There's no doubt about it. You might have issues with how he manifests that on times, but Tony Bloom's put his money where his mouth is. If something happens to him, we've got a problem.
Kieran, the Athletic said on Friday that Tony Bloom was the best owner in the Premier League. Would you agree with that?
Well, it depends. You have to define what you mean by best. Roman Abramovich put £900,000 a week into Chelsea for 19 years. Chelsea got 2 Champions League trophies. How many? 4 Premier League trophies. How many? FA Cups. So he was a fan first who became successful. Whereas with Abramovich was a billionaire first, a multi-billionaire, and he realised that. I used to work in Russia. Russia is a pretty nuts society. Abramovich's biggest worry was that for whatever reason, Putin gets pissed off with him and has him killed. So how do you raise your profile as an oligarch? Well, you buy yourself a high-profile asset. So that £900,000 a week from Abramovich, that was an insurance policy. That because if you went on pointless, you say, well, name an oligarch. The one person that's not going to get you 0 points is going to be Roman Abramovich.
Right, I'm going to move this on a little because I don't think you can see the chat, guys. There's hundreds of questions.
I can. It's already good. Nick, can I just make one quick point though, Nick? Sorry.
Go for it, mate.
While we're talking about this, the one thing that hasn't changed since we started doing the price of football, and we talk about this a lot about communication, is still football, especially at the Premier League level, is a very opaque world. It's very difficult still for fans to find real information about clubs, and ownership in particular is one, and that's something that Palace are going through at the moment. You mentioned Steve Parish, and whatever you think about Steve Parish, and I like Steve on an individual basis, I have to say I really like Steve, and whatever you think about his politics, about what he thinks about the distribution of Premier League money, he's overseen with other people. He's overseen the best period in our sporting life, and you can't deny that. But he's not he's not Tony, but he's not the most wealthy of our owners, and yet he is essentially running the club. And the Harrison Blitzer situation and the John Textor situation in particular is something that Palace fans are baffled about, and it's something that if you're looking for an easy reason why we're not kicking on as younger fans want us to do, that's the one you pick on where you go, well, we don't know. We know Textor wants out, except that he said 2 weeks ago he tried to buy the whole club again 2 weeks ago. And then Harrison Blitzer tried to buy the whole club from him. So you go, well, is anyone confirming or denying this? Textor does want to buy Everton. He doesn't want to buy Everton. He issues that long press release saying how much he loves Palace, but he now loves Everton, and he's being frustrated in his desire to run the club the way he wants, because he wants Palace to be part of the multi-club model. And he's actually saying out loud, the worst thing I ever did was to only buy 40% of this club because I've got no influence in the way this club's running, but the bloke who owns 15% of it has got all the influence. So you can't, as a fan, and even Kieran can't get to that, as a fan, you just want some clarity on who it is that owns your club and what's that, because then what happens then is all the rumours start.
Kev, I think we know the percentages, don't we, of who owns the club, and we know that Steve Parish makes all the decisions. So I'm really glad you've raised the John Textor question, because some people have been asking in the chat, and beforehand people wanted to know the answer to this. What is it that motivates John Textor and people like him, Kieran, that want to adopt this multi-club model?
There's ways of shifting revenues and profits around the planet. We see it with Facebook. We see it with Amazon. So there's tax benefits. If you take a look at Textor and many of these other multi-club owners, they are billionaires. They have been incredibly successful, but they're also a bit bored. They've made so much money. So what do you do? Well, football gives you an adrenaline rush, which is great. Football clubs are still relatively cheap. Textor could have bought Palace probably if he'd come in with a £250 million offer. 5 or 6 years ago, he would have bought the club for that amount of money, but he didn't go for it at the time. If you compare that to buying the Dallas Cowboys or the 49ers, you're talking somewhere in the region of 6 to 10 billion. So football is actually very cheap, and for that you get the adulation. Winning a football. I always say that when you see a goal, that's the closest you can get to 30,000 people having a collective orgasm, and it's an incredible, and it's credible to be part of that. And the owners, when things are working, all of that is in their direction. They are living off it, and these are people with huge egos. Steve Parish has got a big ego. Someone who was before him, who we won't mention, has got a huge ego, to put it mildly. And they think that because they've been good at running a digital images company in the United States, that automatically means that they're good at running a football club. And they want to go to Wembley. They want to have Manchester United coming, and Liverpool coming to their ground, and then they can go and say to their friends, look at me, look how successful I am. So that's what attracts them. With regards to the percentages, I just think he sold himself a really bad deal. Jim Ratcliffe's now running Manchester United. He only owns 27%.
Right.
So it's not the percentage shares, it's the contract which goes along with that, which actually says who controls the business on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And I, for one, am delighted that Steve Parish makes the decisions at Crystal Palace. I actually, from what I've heard about John Textor, I probably don't know enough about it really, but from what I know about it, I don't actually want him near my football club. He can go somewhere else.
Is he on the naughty step, Kieran? Would you place him on the naughty step?
Can I before Kieran answers that, from a Palace perspective, because I saw a couple of comments coming up there, and to answer Andrew's question first, I've given myself Sunday off when it comes to not drinking. By the way. John Textor is John Textor. So the Marathon March, John Textor took over whenever 3 weeks after he took over, we were doing the Marathon March. He donated £10,000 to 5-year plan. So it was 3 o'clock in the morning back in America. So whether he was, I don't know. But so initially, John Textor was brought in purely to fund the infrastructure. That was everybody said that's what he was in. He was investing to fund the newsstand, make some money, get out again. Textor did this whole thing about he'd been looking for a blue collar club in England to invest in, and Palace were presented to him, and what we were doing in our local community chimed with all his values in the States and so on and so forth, which Harriet and Blitz had done to some extent. So Textor came in with this huge amount. By all accounts, Textor is a very amiable chap, but there is no doubt, as a couple of people have indicated here, that recently he's been playing. He's got a couple of tame journalists in the British press. One of whom is a Palace fan, quite high profile on Twitter, who report what he says as breaking news, but we know it's from Textor. Textor's become obsessed with and he's honest enough to say that he wants to buy Everton to make Everton part of his multi-club ownership deal. But the press release he issued to Palace fans several weeks ago, that astonishing long ramble about how it had all gone wrong for him. He wasn't taken seriously at Palace, and he could make Palace as successful as Lyon and Botafogo, whereas we know that the whole of Lyon's squad was put up for sale 3 weeks ago. So we know that there's something. But, it's odd, but we also know he must be very successful because he's a billionaire. He's the richest of them.
Yeah, but not in football, Kev.
No, I quite agree. But this is when it comes to this whole thing about communication and opaqueness, because if football fans don't know who own it, so for example, the whole Gahey transfer saga, when we're holding out for 65, 70 million, Palace fans go, well, is that because Textor wants that money to help buy Everton? How much of that money is going to the club? How much of it's going to you don't? Who's making the decision? Oliver Glasner was hinting that he wasn't making the transfer decisions. Dougie Freeman, Steve Parish, and other people were making the transfer decisions. So unless a club, and I understand why football clubs as a business would say, well, why should we tell fans what we're doing? Because it's none of your business, in a sense. The person who runs WH Smith's, if I go in and buy my paper in WH Smith's, I don't necessarily need to. But as Kieran will tell you, and it's been Kieran's mantra since the start, communication, it's like Kieran's really pleased that who at Chelmsford. That's a good question about Textor and administration. Chelmsford released their accounts. Chelmsford were the first club to release their accounts this season. So Kieran was very happy. As it happened, the accounts weren't brilliant. But at least they released them and they've showed fans what's. So you've always said that, Kieran, about the communication, the visibility, haven't you?
Yeah, but football fans are investors in a football club because you sign, when you fall in love with Crystal Palace, you sign a lifelong contract to go to Selhurst, to renew your season ticket. Now, and as Kevin was saying, look, you've established yourself in the Premier League for a decade now or more, and that's a fantastic achievement. But you've also committed. If you have a couple of shite seasons and you've got Middlesbrough on a Tuesday night in the Championship, you're still there, exactly. and you're still. And in return for that, my argument has always been, if you expect a football fan to renew their season ticket in March and April for the next 12 to 15 months, then the club has an obligation to you as a creditor, as a supplier of cash, to treat you with a bit of respect. And it doesn't take a lot of effort. 95% of fans couldn't give a shit. Provided the club's still there, they just want to go there with the mates. But for those 5% of fans who want to engage, who want to go that step further, we'll give them the opportunity to do so. Because there's no reason why as fans, you cannot be the equivalent of a non-executive director. And the definition of a non-executive director is that you're a critical friend. But the most important thing is that you're a friend.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I'm going to move on to another subject, if you don't mind, boys. And Kieran, this is mainly aimed at you. Kevin, a minute ago, you mentioned Andrew Adams and Tim Richards. Tim Richards is part of the Palace Fans Advisory Board. Okay, and he's obviously a regular presenter here on the Red and Blue Review. He's asking us, to everybody listening out there or watching on YouTube, could you please complete the CPFC Advisory Board survey? It'll only take you a couple of minutes. If you haven't
done it.
If you haven't done it, please jump on it tonight after you donated to Kevin's Lily charity. Kieran, my question to you would be, not just the Palace one, but the fan advisory boards across the country, are they a tick box exercise?
I think it comes down to the relationship between club and the individual boards. I think some clubs are more progressive than others. I'm aware of some FABs where they like the idea of they get to see the kit 3 or 4 days before everybody else does. And that gives them a little warm feeling. Or they get to sit in the boardroom and they have a cup of tea with the chairman. Yeah. And that's on an individual basis that they enjoy it. And the price for doing that is that they don't ask the awkward questions. Mm. So it really does vary from club to club. I work with the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport on things to do with football. And I've heard some of the stories about the contempt with which some executives of clubs hold the FABs. So it does vary. I think the FAB can be fantastic in bringing things to attention and saying, look, you know that we're going to still support the club regardless, but this is in your interests as well as ours to highlight this issue. And we have seen some fan groups really make progress, taking into account that sometimes if you're running a multi-million-pound a year business and you're dealing with talented individuals who are on salaries of £3, £4, £5 million a year, you forget that those people who are having to go and pay an extra 50 pence for a cup of tea, or those people that can't get to the toilets at half time because there's people getting coked out of their tits on them and you don't want to go in, that these things can actually be addressed. So I think it can work, but it comes down, like all things, to relationships and decision making and culture of the organisation.
I think there are two issues, and I'm all for the fan advisory boards. I'm all for anything that involves consultation. I mean, I think that's better. We had this idea 10, 15 years ago that it should be a fan on the board of directors, which is impossible. It's so intense. But my two issues with fan advisory boards, first of all, is that you worry, just as I'm a trustee of the Palace for Life Foundation, I'm the only one that hasn't got a background in charity, local government, NGOs, etc. And my worry is with fan advisory boards that you get the usual suspects. My worry is that how do you recruit onto the fan advisory board? Because you tend to end up, I think, with the more middle class fan, the fans that understand how to get onto the fan advisory board, rather than a really intelligent bloke in the Parsons Arms or the Jolly Sailor who might have not even realise there is a fan advisory board. And the second issue is I know for a fact during the summer with our new sponsor, which I'm still really unhappy about, which no one really knows. But I've seen basically the fan advisory board say to the club, we're really unhappy about the new sponsor, and the response from the club is noted.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, but what does that mean? They're still going to have
exactly so. But the fact is, as most people here have said, quite rightly so, there are very few football clubs, especially in the Premier League. It might be that a club like Crawley or Bromley, a fan advisory board, would be taken seriously, but no one's going to make business decisions at a Premier League club based on what the fan advisory board did. And the fact that you get, the fan advisory board are probably happy with the fact that clubs say, all right, we've heard what you've got to say. We're not going to do anything about it. We're still going to have Net 88 as our sponsors next season, or we're still going to have this oil company that's killing the planet sponsoring the women's team next season. But at least we've had the opportunity. I think sometimes football fans go, well, we've had the opportunity to have our say, that's enough. And it isn't really. But having said that, the concept of fan advisory boards, I think is fantastic. And I think it's some clubs will only ever pay lip service to them, and it's as simple as that. As Kieran says, some clubs will be openly contemptuous. Some clubs will be forward thinking enough to say, okay, we take that on board.
It's a step in the right direction is what you're saying, isn't it? That's not the answer.
It's got to be, yeah.
Kieran, would you say the clubs that have done it, and I know somebody said in the chat just now Brighton haven't done it yet, are only just getting ahead of the independent regulator?
I think Brighton have had one now for 2 or 3 years. I know a mate of mine got sacked from it.
Really?
Yeah. Can't say why.
Well, you've been quite good at saying stuff already, Kieran.
Carry on, Kieran. There's nobody listening, Kieran.
Yeah.
We're not really
in terms of the regulator, will it become part of statute? I don't know. I think what we saw was that the Premier League, because it wants to be able to prove to the former and the present government that it's perfectly capable of looking after its own house. And that's why I think the Leicester decision, the only good thing about it is that, it's proven that it's a bit of a farce what's happening. And remember, the average salary at the Premier League, 141 grand, and they can't write a set of rules which work.
Yeah.
And the reason why Leicester got off, I don't know whether I read the Premier League handbook from cover to cover because I'm a fucking nerd, and that's what nerds do. It actually came down to the definition of club, and the Premier League. This is how it's tied itself in knots. It's got a definition of club with a big C and a definition of a club with a small c. And what the lawyers were able to do is to say there is a difference, and capital letters do make a difference. You take the following phrase. If you use this with capital letters, please help Uncle Jack off the horse. And then use that with small letters, please help Uncle Jack off the horse. They're completely different things, aren't they?
Yeah.
See, he's not only the country's leading football finance expert, he's the country's leading childish football finance expert as well.
But I think that's an important. I use that as an example in class.
Working with you, he's also developed a good sense of humour as well. Kieran, I need to know, the important question tonight is, what spreadsheets have you got open in front of you tonight? I do watch it on the show.
I've got this thing called my maths. I'm actually crap at Excel. My spreadsheet is just a huge list of numbers, and when I send it to other people, they go, Jesus Christ, when did you design this? 1990. I cannot use pivot tables. I cannot design graphs or everything I do is painstakingly slow, because we had Swiss Ramble, who is the guru, and he says, everything, I just press one button. And I cried. It will take me 6 hours to do what he can do in 30 seconds.
Yeah, the only button I understand on this laptop in front of me is the delete button.
Yeah.
Okay, boys, I want to ask you, bear in mind you both love your music, and the Oasis scandal last week, how is dynamic pricing going to affect football clubs?
I think it's part of what we refer to as mission creep in relation to especially the Premier League. And I don't think it affects clubs like Palace and Brighton, but it does affect other clubs in London. It does affect the Manchester clubs. It does affect Liverpool as well. If you can sell a ticket for £80 and you're selling out, you can also sell it for 150. If you take a look at the Liverpool membership scheme, Liverpool match day tickets actually go on sale only twice a year. And you have this almighty scrum. Well, we saw what happened. Yeah, if you've been waiting 5 hours in the queue to get a ticket for Bournemouth at home, and you're a Liverpool fan, and I'm not going to slag off tourist fans. You know, they support their club, even though we are all supporters of Palace and Brighton because of geographical links. They support their clubs for whatever reason. And you thought you were going to get a ticket for Bournemouth at home, and it's going to cost you 60 quid. Well, if you've been in that queue for 5 hours and all of a sudden you get to the end of the queue and say, oh, we've only got 20 tickets left, so we put up the price to 200 quid, you pay 200 quid. It's not right, but it's the direction of travel. We've seen this week the contempt that clubs have in relation to disabled fans. And it's only because we broke on the price of football, the story about Manchester City charging fans. They're going to charge them from nothing to £12 a match. We had the issues with Villa on Friday, and fair play to Stan Collymore and others who kicked off. And we've got our little voice because we are listened to at most clubs. That's the one thing we've got going for us. And we're going to kick off big style on Tuesday about this story because there's another club that's refusing to move. And Kevin's seen the explanation that they've given, which was, I thought it was sort of done in a. I said, is this satire? Is this unreal? But we'll go on with that story on Tuesday. It's part of the fact that to the bigger clubs, if you are a season ticket holder, thank you very much for the last 30, 40 years of good service. Actually, we make so much money from TV and we make so much money from tourist fans. Stay in your lane, fuck off.
Well, this is, if I could put it in a less graphic way, and the story Kieran's talking about, one of the highest profile clubs in the world and their attitude to disabled fans parking, which we are going to discuss on Tuesday. I'm reluctant to mention it now in great detail because we still have to, what's the word journalists use, stand up at one or two of the things before we do it. But the dynamic price, and suddenly as you say, within 2 weeks, football fans are suddenly worried about dynamic pricing. As Kieran said, what stands in the way of dynamic pricing at the moment is season tickets. So at Selhurst Park, for example, in a stadium that holds 24,500, if 18,000 of those are already season tickets that you've sold at a certain price, a guaranteed price, that doesn't leave you much leeway for dynamic pricing. But it is one of the reasons why clubs all over the country, including that, are very, if you can't use your season ticket, let us know, because of course they want you to let them know, because then they can sell your ticket for twice the money on a daily basis to a tourist. And I think, and this is something that Kieran and I have discussed, Kieran's probably more pessimistic about this than I am, because I think it will take longer. Kieran's fairly certain that within 5 years, most clubs won't be offering a season ticket option. Most clubs would be happier. Fulham are heading in that direction already, where they would much rather have every seat in that stadium. And the thing with Palace as well, we are a London club. I've always had this discussion with people. We're a London club. We're not a London club in the same way that West Ham, Arsenal, Chelsea are. Not that we haven't got that but we haven't got the same transport access. We've got Gatwick close by, but if you're a European football fan looking for a one-off visit to the Premier League, then you're not probably going to pick Palace as a place you go. You'll go to Tottenham, you'll go to West Ham. I know West Ham, for example, my accountant, I'm part of a big accountancy group who I've been with since the start, thank God. But, because they didn't have them when West Ham were at Upton Park, but they were to buy.
We're losing, Kev.
We lost Kev there for a minute, actually.
Yeah, but obviously they've got twice as many seats, haven't they?
Well, they have. That's the thing. So at Palace
Stadium
but we haven't got that option at Palace.
No.
So the only option in years to come, and the fact is, the club can make my season ticket costs whatever. Yeah, my season ticket costs quite a lot of money in the half away. I'm sitting behind a pillar. I have to spend 20 minutes at half time queuing for the toilet or rammed in. It's not fit for purpose. Most Scandinavian fans who bought my seat would be really unhappy, right? But say in 5 years' time when we've got the new stand, if that ever happens, then that new stand is going to make a lot more. If there's no season tickets holders in that new stand, right, who are paying what would equate to say 30 quid a game for that ticket, you'll be able to sell a seat in that new stand for 100 quid. Yeah. So the club will make a lot more money by offering every seat in that new stand at 100 quid, and they'll sell it as well. They'll sell it in that.
And Fulham, their new stand on the Riverside, have taken it to a whole new level again, haven't they?
Absolutely.
£3,000 a season ticket. That's only stupid, didn't we, Kieran? Is that what you said?
That's right. Yeah. There's only a few of them, but it's still £3,000.
Yeah. Kev, I'm going to ask you. I'm glad you mentioned the new stand, Kev, because I've got a question for you in a second. And Kieran, I want to talk to you about betting sponsorships in a minute. But Kev, you mentioned the new stand Arthur Way. Can you explain to me, please? Because my thick old head can't work out the logic. So we are removing the TV gantry. Yeah. Okay, we're putting the TV gantry into the lovely shiny new stand. Okay, looking back at the Arthur. Why would we do that as a club? Why would we not showcase our beautiful new stand from the Arthur Way?
Well, I hesitate. I hesitate to use the words "typical Palace," but surely the time is long gone when we look for any sort of logic in what Palace do. The thing I'd say about that new stand, and I understand from what I know Kieran wants to come in here. I understand why Steve Parish in particular wants it, and it looks great. The model in reception looks great, and I understand that finally disabled fans will have proper access to. Sellers Park's a really strange ground. Whatever way you approach it, somehow it's uphill. I don't know how that works. So for disabled fans, Sellers Park is not. It's way short of an ideal environment. Let's face it. Okay. And one of the arguments that Steve Parish puts out, quite rightly so, is that the new stand will have proper state-of-the-art facilities for disabled fans, wheelchair fans, blind fans, and so on and so forth. That's great. My argument is that in 5 years' time, I'm going to be stuck shoulder to shoulder in the Arthur Way, waiting 20 minutes to get a beer. But I'll have a perfect view, because the TV gantry won't be there. I'll have a perfect view of all those shiny fuckers in the restaurant having beers brought to their table. And so I think there are other parts of the ground.
I'm looking forward to it.
I think there are other parts of the ground that need. The Arthur Way is not fit for purpose. It's as simple as that. It's not fit for purpose, the Arthur Way.
So why would you showcase it from the new stand, from the TV gantry?
Somebody's made a point there about the sun and the autumn. But I don't know. You need to talk to. I mean, Kieran. I know Kieran's got something to say. The fact is, the two parts of Sellers Park are not fit for purpose. The main stand and the Arthur Way aren't fit for. But I would rather find. I don't know how you do this, but I'd rather have found a solution that made both stands 50% better. Rather than one stand being 100% better, and we're still living in the Stone Age. It's darker. Sorry, Kieran, what are you going to say?
It was actually what somebody had said. Because I asked this at another club. So this looks great. He said we can't do it because of the way that the sun sets. And from because if you're high up in a gantry, what you don't want is sun creep, because that really pisses off the broadcasters. And remember, as far as Palace and Brighton are concerned, £1 in every 11 comes from matchday tickets.
Yeah.
80% of the income of the club is coming from broadcast. So whatever the broadcasters want, the broadcasters get.
Yeah. Teresa Baker makes an interesting point. Nobody watches a football match to admire the stands anyway. So, doesn't matter what the gantry is, does it?
Kieran, you touched on the next subject already. You mentioned broadcasters. Front of shirt sponsorship ban next year on betting companies. Andrew Adams asks, how does this affect TV companies? Sky, TalkSport, ITV, they all run with Betfred and Betfair and Bet this and Bet that. How does it affect them?
It doesn't affect them at all. Sleeve sponsorship can still be from betting companies. Perimeter advertising can still be from betting companies. The betting industry, and Kevin and myself both bet, and it's time for me to confess again. I put on quite a large amount of money at Christmas on Palace to finish above Brighton last season.
I heard you say that on your pod the other week.
Shameful.
Lucrative. So yeah, we've got nothing. We've got nothing in opposition to get the gambling industry, apart from the fact that it should do more to look after those people who are vulnerable, and it chooses to pay lip service. It does the bare minimum with regards to that. If you take a look at the whistle-to-whistle ban that we now have, and this was announced to big trumpets and so on. What does the whistle-to-whistle ban mean? It means that you don't have advertising for the gambling industry at half time, but the show is now sponsored by Bet365. So just as we've seen with Leicester and other clubs that have circumvented the rules in relation to financial fair play, the gambling industry is circumvented, in my view, its responsibilities. All that you will see is the gambling industry replaced by crypto, Web3, and gambling with the small G industry companies. And they're all focused on Asia. Yeah, because if you look at Palace's sponsors and Burnley sponsors and Bournemouth sponsors, all these people, you go, well, we've never heard of them. And we look to see that Fulham have just announced a new sponsor, and it turns out that all of the people in the glossy adverts, they're just stock pictures from Getty Images. So all that we can do as fans is to highlight this, and there are good people out there. There's some really good investigative journalists who do sterling work, but you are farting against thunder as far as the industry is concerned.
But there's two things off the back of that. The first is, I go. I've got a strict limit. I don't bet. I bet on a Saturday, and £10. That's my limit. I don't know how professional gamblers do it. If I put 20 quid in a horse, I can't watch the race. I can't sleep the night before. But I love horse races. Horse racing is probably my second favourite sport. But I would be happier with betting's involvement in football if football took money off the betting industry. Right? The horse racing exists because they take I think it's 20% levy. So all the information that William Hill's Ladbrokes uses, the race cards, whatever, they have to pay the racing industry for that. Football takes no money at all from the game, apart from the money that the sponsors pay. There's no levy, and it makes no sense. But also, let's not be fair. It's been quite some time now since you were able to advertise alcoholic drinks on the front of football shirts. And yet Sky's coverage of the EFL, and let's not forget, Sky, virtually every game. So Sky's coverage of the EFL was trebled this season. Sky's coverage of the EFL is sponsored by Jameson's. So every ad break so that the programs are 3 hours long. Every ad break is brought to you by Jameson's. You go in and out of the ad break, brought to you by Jameson's. No one's making a fuss about it. So the gambling companies, as Kieran says, the gambling companies will find a way around it. Pitchside gambling adverts they'll find a way to do that. As Kieran says, you can still have shirt sleeve sponsorship. What the Premier League will probably do is make short sponsorship legal, so the gambling companies can sponsor that. They'll find a way around it, and it's just like the betting industry is taking the piss out of football, and it's ridiculous. And you have people like Paul Merson, who are bravely and openly talking about their fight with gambling, who are still having to do their punditry on a show that's sponsored by a fucking gambling company. There's a real tin ear. There's a real tin ear from the gambling, and it's when the net 88 thing is real. It's not as bad as Bournemouth because they've got BJ on the front of their shirt, but it's just some bright young kid in the marketing department didn't realise. But the net 88 thing is wrong. It's just Kieran uses the phrase quite a lot. Blinded by the check. Yeah. We don't know what this company didn't exist in March. It didn't exist. Yeah. And then suddenly they turned up with 7 followers on Twitter. The photograph of the CEO was somebody who'd been dead for quite some time. And it's like, so the only reason you can think that we've taken this spot is like when we had Cinches. It's something you feel. I don't mind Cinch as a sponsor. I don't know, car company. But
exactly.
You think that's all right. That's quite a credible. They sponsor the England cricket team in a way that, and then suddenly you think it's such a backward. You think this is such a championship move, having this sponsor. Everything's going in the right direction.
That's all over.
Kev, every Palace fan would agree with you. Nobody is happy with the new shirts.
Right, boys, I'm conscious of the time. I did say she was only going to be an hour. We're already at an hour and 20 minutes. I'm conscious for you, not for us. I've got hundreds of questions here that I haven't even got to.
Let's get you back.
Can you give us another 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, one of the questions was asked. Okay, they're aware of your road shows that you do. Any plans to come to Sellers Park?
Well, yes, there are. We've Julian, who does our live show. We're very keen to do a Sellers Park Brighton double header.
Really?
Well, not on the same night, but we're to do one.
Oh, right.
We are doing one in South London in the 17th of October, Kieran.
Yeah.
We're doing one in Banana Cabaret in Balham as part of the podcast festival. But yeah, we'd love to do one at Sellers Park. It's some clubs are a little bit wary of us. Let's put it that way. So I'm not saying that Palace are one of them, but we find it easier to get invited to clubs in League One, League Two, who feel that we're on their side, rather than some Premier League clubs who think we're a bit chippy, basically. And it's also that thing as well where we're trying to strike a balance between when we're trying to get new people in who are interested in football and might be interested in football finance. We're sort of trying to see if we can find a theatre to do it rather than do it at an actual club. Yeah, I'd love to do a specific Palace one, and Kieran would love to do a specific Brighton one. I suspect there'd be more to talk about at the Palace one than there would be at the Brighton one at the moment. I think if we were to do one at Brighton, it'd all be over in 5 minutes because it'd be like, everything's good, isn't it? Yeah, fine. Yeah, great. Whereas there's a lot more questions.
It'll be back to the bar for another pins. Yeah.
So, yeah, we are looking to do more live things. But again, it comes back to that thing about growing our audience, because every live gig we've done so far, we sell 400 tickets. But we know that we'll sell out 500 tickets, 400 tickets. We know that. So we now sort of want to take that on a step if we can and move that up a little bit. And that might involve having to get different guests away. But we love doing the live one because Kieran, not that Kieran's been discreet tonight, but in the live scenario, Kieran, every now and again, I try to remind I was doing a comedy show a couple of years back talking about Prince Andrew, and I've been banging on about what a shithouse Prince Andrew is for a long time. And I did this show 2 years ago, and I was telling the audience how vindicated I was. I said, "What have I been telling you?" So I did this whole long routine about Prince Andrew. And this lawyer came up to me afterwards and said, "You need to be a bit careful about some of the stuff you're saying about Prince Andrew there." And I went, No, it's fine, mate. It's a live environment. Everyone knows that in a live environment, you can say what you want. And this lawyer went, "I don't know where you people get that idea from. The laws of libel and slander apply just as much to anyone."
Live stuff.
Yeah. And I went, "Well, everyone knows the royal family would never sue." He said, "Again, I don't know where you people get that idea from." So the thing is with the live shows, Kieran is much more, I mean, how Lawrence Bassini of Watford hasn't chased us, I really don't know. But the live shows are much more, not exciting, but it's just great. I love a live audience anyway. And Kieran's brilliant with the live audience because he's a natural communicator. So the live show is great. The live show, where the live shows really take off is the Q&A, because you get some really left field questions. We don't show Kieran the questions either. That's the genius. People think that I show Kieran the questions at half time. I don't. I just throw the questions at him, and he answers them. Some of them are not repeatable, but
I remember when he first came onto this years ago, and I said to him, "Do you want to know the list of questions before?"
No.
He said, "No."
No.
Listen, I want to mention somebody, Kevin. You very kindly touched on disabled supporters earlier on. Bruce Muirhead is out in YouTube land watching this show, and he is the chairman of the Palace DSA. We have a very, very close, here on Rivalry Review, we have an extremely close working relationship with the DSA. And Bruce, well done for all the work you do, mate. He's saying thank you to you, Kevin, for highlighting the disabled supporters in the newsstand and everything else. So, Bruce, big up to you.
Bruce, I would urge you to listen to our podcast on Tuesday, which we're recording tomorrow, because this sudden thing where Premier League clubs have suddenly decided that Premier League clubs who are literally rolling in money have decided that there's a saving to be made by charging disabled fans for car parking where they haven't done before. Yeah. The story we're going to talk about is it's just shameful. It's just shameful. We had a chap called Andy Payne on from the West Ham Independent Supporters Association.
Brilliant.
He was great, but he was talking about West Ham chipping away at concessionary prices, and that's what clubs are doing. And the fact is as well, there's no getting away from this. There's no getting away from this. That a disabled space takes up the space that 3 non-disabled fans would take. Right. So in an ideal world, the club would rather have the 3 non-disabled fans spending the money. But I'm not saying disabled fans are a nuisance to them, but they are a nuisance to some clubs. And the fact is that they are trying to save, I don't know, Kieran, 10, 15 grand a year by taking away concessionary card is just shameful to all concerned.
Makes me want to vomit.
The fact is that we've had disabled fans on that. And if Bruce wants to come on and talk to us about his lived experience, we're always happy to hear this, because that's one of the things I love about doing the pod, is I've discovered things about other types of fans. We're talking to gay fans, to black fans, to all sorts of fans. And you just think, where have I been all these years that I didn't realise these issues, that I didn't realise how difficult it is. We had that young lad, Kieran, who just is a home and away supporter of his club, Bristol's just championship. I can't, but just saying that some clubs, having stewards not knowing that they were turning up, hoisting him in his wheelchair down the front, and it's like, it's just ridiculous. But the fact is, it does come down to money in the end, and disabled fans are expensive to look after. That's as simple, and that's how they see it. And that shouldn't be an issue in any way, shape. You can see it. So it is. Selhurst Park's an impossible ground. It's really difficult. Which is, again, and I believe Steve Parish when he says, "With the new stand, we'll sort these problems out." But it's 2024. That stand's not going to be open until 2029, if at all. It was supposed to be open this season, if you remember.
Yeah.
And it's. I mean, Kieran, and this is an issue that we've only discovered, Kieran, in the last 2 years, and people have come to us, because I don't think it occurred to us. But Kieran, how much money is a club, Villa and Man City, who have now backed down? I mean, what would they have saved?
Villa increased the. They doubled the charges for disabled fans from 190 to 380 quid. So if you've got 200 spaces, 200 times 200, it's 40 grand.
Yeah.
And then you look to see how much the chief executive earns.
Yeah. The reason it's criminal is that it's such a very small percentage of Premier League money as well.
Well, we are very proud.
You'll find is that the lower down the pyramid you get, the more amenable the clubs are to disabled fans, the more welcoming they are, the more they'll go out of their way to welcome them and help them watch a football match.
Well, Bruce and Lindsay are regulars on our little pod. Okay, and this coming season, they know that they're going to be on here more and more this year, highlighting any issues they have with our football club. Boys, I'm going to wrap this up shortly, but before I do, I want to ask you, where do you see the price of football in 5 years' time?
Hopefully wound up.
Well,
because then there's no problems left. We're effectively, we become an activist show. We never intended it to be, because 90% of the stories that we run are things which are wrongdoings in terms of the governance, in terms of the control, in terms of the treatment of fans. So we're probably the only podcast that wants to go out of existence.
We are. We are in a bizarre situation where we're doing a pod we'd rather not be doing, to be honest. And I think, to come right back to the start of this pod, where you asked about how the price of football started, Kieran and I both thought, I gave it 3 months basically. At that, I just didn't think there was the general interest in football. I thought it was too niche, to be honest. And I said at the start, I said, look, if we can talk about football as well, that would be great. But the producer guy said, no, there's so many people talk about football, just stick to football finance. And then, unfortunately, there are a number of big stories that broke as we started, Bury in particular, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And I think what happened is that football fans realised that we were almost pissing in the wind in a way, but that we were coming from exactly the right place, that we were, and neither of us wants to be. We're not natural campaigners, but both of us would rather be the bits of the pod that I really enjoy, and I love doing it. I really love doing it, and I learn so much from it. And I wish I could retain a lot of that information. I know it really annoys Kieran, but it kind of helps the pod in a way that I don't, because my role is as useful idiot, which is my role used to be when I did racing on 5 Live, and I'm useful idiot. I'm the one asking the questions on behalf of the people at home who don't get the intricacies. But both Kieran and I the bits that make us laugh. We've both got a similar. We're both from South London. We're both from Anglo-Irish backgrounds. We've both got similar musical tastes. We've both got really childish senses of humour. And the bits that on the pod I love is when we make each other laugh when there's an accidental knob joke. An accidental reference to a carry on for. Kieran is the second most. Kieran has contributed more to the Visprophanosaurus than everybody else except one person, which I'm very proud of. So in an ideal world, I hope that in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I'd like to think that we'll be in the old folks' home, and we'll be sitting around the piano singing Sex Pistols songs around the old piano, doing But I love doing it. But at the same time, sometimes you take your headphones off and turn the microphone off, and you think, "Fucking hell, football's in there." And I can understand it. I think every football fan watching this now, I've got a couple of mates, one of whom now goes to Bromley, one goes to Sutton, because they just can't deal with the finance stuff anymore. They can't deal with the VAR stuff, the referee stuff. They can't deal with you have to win at all cost stuff. And I can understand that. And I think all Kieran and I really want to do is show the world that, which is why, again, I think that's another reason why we were successful from the start, is that we will talk about Falkirk or Airdrie or a team in San Marino as much as we will talk about Man United or Liverpool, because we know, like Accrington's, we've got a really good relationship with Accrington Stanley, who have probably got 1,200 season ticket holders. We joke about Edinburgh City, who've got 30 season ticket holders. But to those 30 season ticket holders of Edinburgh City and those 1,200 Accrington season ticket holders, those clubs are every bit as important as Man United or Liverpool. And that's something we try to reflect right from the start. So we've covered Inverness, Caledonian Thistle getting into trouble as much as we've covered Everton. And I think that's what fans have appreciated. I think they've appreciated the fact. And I think we do represent that there is a bit of romance left in football. And that's what we try to reflect, that in the final analysis, the most important thing is, taking the piss out of Brighton is really important, right?
Absolutely.
Beating them is really important. But we all know that the most important thing is just having a club that exists, that is there. And all we want is that every fan has their club. And I don't think that's too much to ask for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that's a feasible. I mean, you can argue as much as you want that 92 clubs is too many for a small country like England. But there's not 92 clubs. There's hundreds of clubs going down to Sunday League clubs that we represent. And those clubs have always been there. There's no reason why we shouldn't want them to always be there. And I don't think that's romantic or old-fashioned. But that's why we annoy clubs in the Premier League, and long may we continue.
Listen, mate, just so people realise we are absolutely live. Ronaldo's just put Portugal 2-1 up, against the Jocks. Boys, in case you can't see the chat, please make sure you read the comments in the chat, because there is massive love for you both. Okay,
that's what, we've seen them. That's kind of you. Thank you.
And I've got, Ian and I've got loads of stuff that we haven't covered with you tonight.
Yeah.
It'd be a pleasure to have you back on again in another international break, because it's been a brilliant insight. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, we'd love to. And if you've got any specific Palace questions, and ask them, we'll do them on the pod on F1, because the Palace situation is one that's intriguing to us and Everton fans. So any questions you have about Palace and the way Palace is. But I think, Kieran, it might be quite a nice positive way to end. In general, Palace are doing all right, aren't they, financially?
Yeah, they're solid. Yeah, they're living within their means. They've got a very good player trading model. As a business, they're ticking along fine.
You've heard it there. You've heard it there. The
finance expert.
I love Dawn's cat. What's Dawn's cat called? She's gorgeous.
Dawn, what's your cat called, love? I don't know what it's called. While while she's putting that up, I'm going to say, stay where you are for just a second, lads. Ladies and gentlemen out in YouTube and Facebook land, thank you so much for joining us on this special that was only supposed to be an hour long. We're approaching an hour and 3/4 already. I've got to say thank you to Ian for joining me, Nigel in the background for producing as always. Please like, share and follow wherever you can. Kevin and Kieran, I won't forget this, boys. I owe you both a big beer. I know you don't drink, Kieran, but I owe you both a pint. We're going, as it says on there, we're going to be back on Sunday the 15th covering the Leicester game. Guys, if I can just ask you to stay there while we go off air. Guys out in Facebook land, take care, be safe. We'll see you next week. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See you in the Pawsons.